Good evening, guys. Thank you for joining us. This is the Ezra's Eagle Facebook page, a live conversation with the author Michael Rush. Our Facebook page is based around the books written by Michael Rush. He has written 3 books having to do with prophecy in the latter days. Michael, you have a degree in accounting and information systems from Brigham Young University, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and he works as a CFO of a private equity firm and lives with his family in the southern part of the United States. And you're also a CPA.
That's correct.
Yeah, and so you're really good with data.
Yeah.
And numbers and symbols and things like that. And that's what makes these books so fascinating for the rest of us, is that you have done so much research. I understand you've had an interest in these types of prophecies since you were a young man.
Yeah, I've been fascinated with the House of Israel ever since I was a kid, and it really blossomed when I read this book, O Jerusalem, in high school, and it, ever since then I've had a hunger to understand everything I could about the House of Israel.
And I think that you understand quite a bit. And so we're really fortunate to be able to learn from your study and your research. The first book that came out was called A Remnant Shall Return. This is a new edition of this book, right? It's been revised?
Yeah, the first version came out in 2015, and there were several versions of it. Then I re-released this one in 2020, but there really hasn't been much that's changed since 2018.
Okay.
In 2018, when I wrote the book in 2015, I put the back section on my website password protected.
Okay.
Because I didn't want people reading it without the context of the rest of the book. And then in 2018, I added that to the book itself. And then in 2020, because of things going on with Trump, I just updated the Ezra's Eagle a little bit.
Okay.
And I had someone go through and proofread it one more time. And so those were really the only changes.
Those are the changes, because there's been a lot of talk about the changes and which version that they should get. And this is also available in an audio version, right?
Yeah, it's available for free in audio on my website, thelost10tribes.com. If you just go to the main page there, you'll see some instructions. Just follow those instructions and you can download the audio for free.
And that's the number 10. And I'll post that website later. Your second book is Daniel 11.
Yep.
I think that this is a good starter book, even though it's the second one that you've written. Personally, I think that this is a really good one to start with to digest the information.
I agree with that. It's easy to read. The first one has 800 scripture references in it. It's dense. The font is very small. I was trying to minimize the volume of it. It probably really should be like 500 pages instead of 300 some odd pages. It's very small font. And Daniel 11 is easier to read, but your Remnant is my favorite. I mean, it's got so much background that you need to understand to be able to understand the book of Revelation and Daniel.
Right, okay. And then your latest came out 2019, Revelation, the vision of John the Divine.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so you call him John the Divine. He's also known as John the Revelator.
And John the Beloved.
John the Beloved. Mm-hmm. And, if we're going to cite sources for everything, right? So John was an apostle of the Lord.
That's correct.
Yeah, and he was known as John the Beloved. He says he was loved by Jesus. He's the brother of James as well.
He was the youngest apostle and just had a very special relationship with Jesus Christ. I mean, the fact that Jesus looked to John and said, "Behold thy mother," and then his mother, "Behold thy son." I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about the relationship between John and Jesus. Yeah. Because Jesus had brothers, but he entrusted his mother to John.
Now, John had a brother named James, and Jesus had a brother named James. Two different people, though, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so then when John was exiled to the island of Patmos, which is where? Near Ephesus, they say. What, off of China? Asia?
I'm not sure where it is. I know that it's within it was within the Roman Empire. The Romans couldn't kill him. They tried to. If you look at some of the apocryphal writings about John, he was in Rome. They tried to throw him into a vat of boiling oil. Nothing happened to him. So they ultimately decided to exile him to Patmos with no way of getting off.
And it was in Patmos that he received these revelations that comprise the book of Revelation, correct? Yeah. Okay, and then tell us about John's, the deal he made. Like, what did he ask the Lord for?
Well, this is very interesting. We're all familiar with the part in the New Testament where Christ has been resurrected. He's met the apostles on the beach, and he had some fish and a little fire going there, and he turns to Peter and says, "Peter, lovest thou me?" And Peter says, "Yea, Lord, thou knowest I love thee." And he repeats that 3 times in a row. "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, I love you." "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, I love you." And then he said, and each time he says, "Then feed my sheep." And Christ was obviously trying to get Peter to think, about why he was asking this question. But Peter, as we know, was pretty impulsive. And right after this, Christ asks Peter, "Whatever you want, Peter, I'll do that for you. What do you want?" And Peter says, "Lord, I want to come speedily and be with you in your kingdom." And he says, "Okay." Turns to James. "James, I'll do anything you want. What do you want?" Same thing. Then he turns to John. John was the only one of the 3 that clued in. Hey, the Lord is trying to tell a message here. If you love me, feed my sheep. And so John says, "Lord, I want to stay I want to stay here feeding your sheep until you come again." And so of the original 12 apostles, John is still alive. And John was a member of the first presidency. And the original, he is the senior apostle.
Yeah.
So it's pretty fascinating. And I talk, a lot about John, obviously, in, A Remnant Shall Return and in Revelation.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I wanted to cover exactly who he is so that everybody understands. And we'll talk later when we talk about the lost 10 tribes, we can talk about where John might be now.
Yeah, sure.
Because he's going to come back, right? But one of the most fascinating things that people really were fascinated by in A Remnant Shall Return was this vision of Ezra's eagle. It comes from a book called the Apocrypha. Can you explain to us what the Apocrypha is?
Yeah, so the Apocrypha, most people don't understand the Apocrypha, the background behind the Apocrypha, but the Apocrypha was included in the King James Bible up until right around the turn of the 20th century, when the Church of England said, okay, we're going to pull this out of the King James Bible. But up until that point, when the Pilgrims came across, they had the Apocrypha in their Bible. When George Washington laid his hand on the Bible to swear in, the Apocrypha was in there. When Joseph Smith opened, to James to learn about,
James
getting
1:5.
wisdom, 3:5 is it? 1:5. The Apocrypha was in there. When the pioneers crossed the plains with their Bibles, the Apocrypha was in there.
Why was it removed?
It was removed because the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury, I believe. There are some mistakes in the Apocrypha. Some of the leaders are in there in the wrong order. There's some factual inconsistencies, and so it was removed for that.
But isn't the Bible also have some mistranslations?
Yeah. I mean, the Bible has some things that are, at odds with each other, like, Paul, when he said that he saw a light, but those with him didn't. I mean, there's different accounts that seem to contradict each other. There's different accounts of Judas' death. So I mean, there's some inconsistencies in the Bible, but they chose. And another reason that they removed those books from the Apocrypha and why they were in the Apocrypha to begin with is they could not find them originally written in ancient Hebrew.
Okay.
So the Apocrypha, the books were either in Latin or in Greek. And, most people, Ezra's Eagle comes from an apocryphal book called Second Esdras.
Mm-hmm.
And
Esdras is another word for Ezra.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the Greek name for Ezra.
Okay.
So the version in the Apocrypha was translated from Greek. That's why it's Second Esdras.
And that book is written by Ezra?
Yes. Okay. Well, it's attributed to him. Okay.
Because John wrote some of the Apocrypha, right?
Well, there's lots and lots of apocryphal books, okay? And not all apocryphal books are created equal. So, I mean, if you want to go down that little wormhole, I mean, we can talk about it whatever you want. But Second Esdras is in, or the vision of Ezra's eagle comes from Second Esdras.
Okay. And
the Jews hold Ezra as a major prophet.
Yes.
And they say, hey, if we didn't get the law of Moses from Moses, we would have gotten it from Ezra. Because when they were, when Jerusalem was sacked and the Babylonians carried everyone away into captivity, they lost much of their heritage, their artifacts in the temple, their sacred relics, their scriptures. Mm-hmm. When people were running for their lives, they weren't packing, special things up. And so, one of the things that Ezra is famous for is giving the Jews back their scriptures. The Lord blessed him and multiple scribes, and he just word for word quoted the scriptures that we now have, according to the apocryphal writings.
Okay, so the part of the Esdras that we've been talking a lot about on the Facebook page is this vision of Ezra's eagle.
Yeah. And
so if we wanted to, there's a lot of questions about Ezra's eagle and what these different things mean. So in the symbolism of Ezra's eagle, this is a vision seen by Ezra in the book.
I can give you a kind of a rundown of that. But before I do that, let me just explain to you, because this is really important that you understand the context in which I came to understand Ezra's eagle. Because I read the vision of Ezra's eagle, before, I ever wrote this book. But I didn't understand it. I knew that it was important, and, I just couldn't figure it out. And years went by, and then after I wrote this book, because the original version did not have Ezra's eagle in it.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I had originally written the book in... I finished the book the original book around August of 2015. And it didn't have Ezra's eagle in it. And I was lying in my bed one morning, and kind of when you're halfway between sleep and being awake. This is the original Remnant Shall Return.
Okay, quite a bit thinner.
Yeah, well, it's quite a bit thinner. It doesn't have the back section, and chapter 2 is the Great and Abominable. There is no Ezra's eagle section in there.
Okay.
So Ezra's eagle came about after I had read this and understood everything that's in this book and was pondering it, I had this impression, you need to go back to the Apocrypha and read that revelation that you read so many years ago. And I hadn't thought about this in years.
Okay.
And so I said, okay, yeah, I'm going to go and do that. So I went down, I was living in Draper at the time, went to the Draper Library, got out the Apocrypha and started reading it. And this time, it was just an amazing experience.
So like a revelation.
It was.